Hi there, welcome to another video from Hegarty Maths. It's Mr. Hegarty here, and in this video we are sketching a fully labelled quadratic graph. Let's start with something we already know. Now previously we have learnt to find the following key points on a quadratic graph. Pause the video and double check you remember the names of the key points or the key features of the quadratic. Well, hopefully you will remember their names as follows. The first one we learnt how to identify was the y-intercept. We found that by making x equals 0. Then we learnt how to find the x-intercepts. We found that by making y equals 0 and solving the quadratic. Subsequent to that, we found the line of symmetry, which was exactly halfway in between the two roots or x-intercepts. And lastly, we found the turning point in two ways. We found the turning point in one way by knowing the x value here, because after all the turning point is on the line of symmetry. So if we knew the x value, because we knew the line of symmetry, we could substitute that x value in to get the y value and we'd have the coordinates. The other way is to complete the square. And completing the square, put it in a form where we could read off that turning point straight away. So that's what we have learnt, and now we're going to put it all together and do all the various features at once. Let's start with an example. I want you to pause the video and see if you can draw, sketch and label up this particular quadratic, and this time I'm just going to do a bit of restriction on you. Please only use factorising, don't use completing the square. Pause, have a go. Okay, first thing is first, you should look at that and say it's a positive x squared graph. Given that it's a positive x squared graph, you know that it is a U-shaped parabola. Now the second thing, we are going to find the y-intercept, aren't we? And the y-intercept we find by making x equals 0 in our equation. If x is 0, then we get clearly that y is negative 8, so we know the y-intercept is at 0, negative 8. The next thing we're going to go for the x-intercept. We find that by making y equals 0, and we're going to solve, therefore 0 equals x squared subtract 2x subtract 8. We try and solve that by factorising, and we get ourselves x take away 4, x add 2, and therefore we get two solutions, x is positive 4 or x is negative 2. So therefore the x-intercepts are at 4, 0 and at negative 2, 0, and we're done. Now the next thing we should go for is the line of symmetry. The line of symmetry is halfway between the roots. So the line of symmetry, we're going to add up those roots or y-intercepts. 4 add negative 2 divided by 2. We work out the average of those numbers and we get 1. So we know that x is 1 is going to be our line of symmetry. Now with what we've got, it's worth plotting our parabola. So let's do that. We also know it's a U-shaped, so we've got the information to have a decent go at the sketch. Let's do that. Now remember, it reaches its turning point on the line of symmetry and it comes back up now. And there you go. That's not a bad attempt at the graph y equals x squared subtract 2x subtract 8. The only point we haven't identified yet is this minimum point here. We know that at the minimum point, the turning point, x is 1. So if we substitute in x is 1, we get the y value that matches that. So let's do that for number 5. When x is equal to 1, y is going to be 1 squared take away 2 multiplied by 1 subtract 8. Y is going to be 1 take away 2 take away 8. Y is therefore negative 9. So this coordinate is 1, negative 9. This coordinate here, the turning point, is 1, negative 9, and we're done. Okay, so there you go, sketching a fully labelled quadratic graph just using the technique of factorising. Now, I'm going to do the exact same graph here, but I'm going to show you that you could have done this by completing the square as well. I'll just leave it up to you which one you rather to do. So, this time, the exact same graph, pause the video, see if you can draw a fully labelled quadratic graph just by completing the square, not by factorising. Okay, you still start off in the way of identifying that it's a positive x squared, so therefore it's a U-shaped graph. And the only way also to get the y-intercept is to make x be 0. That's just standard. You make x equal 0 and you get y is negative 8, so you know 0, negative 8 is the y-intercept. Now let's go and complete the square. and see what we get from that. We're going to be surprised what we get from that. We do get the turning point, but we're going to be able to get the x-intercepts fairly easily too. Let me show you. Our equation is y is equal to x squared subtract 2x subtract 8. If we complete the square, we write it with x there and a squared. We halve that number, -1. We square that out in our heads. X squared we get, subtract 2x we get, add 1. We don't want that add 1, we subtract the 1, and don't forget to subtract the 8 that was already there. Tidying that up, we get the following. Now, we know for free that the turning point is therefore at the opposite sign to this number here, so it'll be at 1, and it will be at that very number there, -9. So we've got now our turning point. And because we know our turning point, we know the line of symmetry lies on the line x is 1. We know that for sure because of how these graphs go. So x is 1 must be the line of symmetry. Now we've pretty much got everything. Let's label those in. So what have we got? We've got 0, -8 down here is the y-intercept. We've got the turning point at 1, -9. So from this point, one more across and one more down. 1, -9. We also know that the line of symmetry goes through the line x is equal to 1. It always, after all, goes through the turning point. Okay, so we've pretty much got all we want. The only thing we don't have are the x-intercepts. Now, we know how to find the x-intercepts. To find the x-intercepts, or the roots, you let y equal 0. So you could let y equal 0 up here and solve by factorising, but why create extra work for yourself? You could make y be 0 here in the completed the square form, and actually that turns out fairly easy to solve. We have in the past learned how to solve quadratics by completing the square. So let's solve y equals 0 in this form here. So I'm going to solve x subtract 1 all squared take away 9, this expression equaling 0. If I add 9 to both sides, I get x subtract 1 squared is equal to 9. If I take the square roots of both sides, I get x subtract 1 on this side, and on this side I get positive or -3. So on the one hand I get x subtract 1 is +3, and on the other hand I get x subtract 1 is -3. That's the process of taking square roots of both sides, remembering I get a positive or -9. And adding 1 to both sides I get x is 4, and adding 1 to both sides I get x is -2. And therefore I have myself my roots or my x-intercepts. One's at 4, 0, and one's at -2, 0. And again, I've got everything I need to have a decent attempt at drawing this graph here. And there you go, there's my sketch. And you can see we got all the key features labelled in, just like in the case we factorised, okay? So it's up to you which one you prefer. I'll leave that totally up to you to decide. Last example, here we go. I'll totally leave it in your hands which way you want to do it. But pause the video and sketch that quadratic. First things first, you need to understand it's a negative quadratic. So it's going to be an n-shaped parabola. That's important. A lot of people forget that when they look at something like this. Okay, the second thing, nice and easily, we could work out the y-intercept. That's just simply a case of making x be 0. If you make x be 0 here, you get y is 10, and you know it goes through 0, 10. Now, I'm going to find the x-intercepts now, and I'm going to do that by making y equal 0. And I'm going to make y equal 0 up here. I'm going to solve it by factorising. Okay, I've just done so many of those, I'm so used to that. I'm going to solve 10 subtract 3x subtract x squared equals 0. Because I've got a negative x squared, that's causing me a little bit of a problem. So I multiply both sides of the equation by -1, because I know 0 multiplied by -1 preserves that as 0. And that gets me x squared add 3x subtract 10 is equal to 0, which factorises really nicely into x add 5, x take away 2 is 0, and I get the answer as x is -5 or x is +2. So therefore my roots are at -5, 0 and at 2, 0. Now, where's my line of symmetry? It's halfway between these, so I add up the numbers and divide by 2, and I get myself -3/2, or -1.5. And lastly, I know for sure that, well, let me just label those points in. 0, 10 is up here. This point here is -5, 0, and this point here is going to be 2, 0. And I know that the line of symmetry is that x is negative 1.5, something like this. So I could pretty much draw my quadratic from there, so I'm just going to draw that up here. Remember, it reaches its maximum point on the line of symmetry and then starts coming down through here again. And there you go, there's my graph. The only thing I'm missing is to actually label the turning point here. So all I'll do is I'll substitute x is negative 1.5 into my quadratic. I would get y is 10, subtract 3 multiplied by negative 1.5, subtract negative 1.5 all squared. So that's just a case of you tapping that in the calculator really carefully and not making a mistake when you do that, and you would get yourself 12.25, and it kind of makes sense, it's got to be higher than this 10. So therefore the turning point is at negative 1.5 and 12.25. And that's it for this particular video. Thank you very much for watching.